Hi, I'm Sam Smith. Grab a stool. The conversations are about to begin on Apps TV's Sports Bar. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on Sports Bar. We've got a lot of sports to cover this week, so let's get right started with the introduction of our panel. And, of course, our usual panel is with us. Of course, Ashlyn Schlachter. She's a rising senior from Cary, and we're happy to have her. On the next tool is Chris Warner. He's a rising senior from Waxhaw and the sports editor for the Appalachian. Congratulations there. And, of course, on the very end, the very talkative Travis Stanley. And he, of course, from Warnersville and a rising junior on our panel. Thanks for joining us again this week. Looks like we got a fun-filled show. David Jackson, by the way, is not with us today. He is covering Media Day for the Sun Belt Conference down in New Orleans. I know it's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. And David will be back with us and, of course, talking much, much more about the Sun Belt and also about Appalachian State. So with that in mind, the coaches have already said, hey, I'll vote. They picked Georgia Southern as number one. They, of course, won it last year. They weren't eligible for the bowl. Lafayette got that, won the New Orleans Bowl for the fourth straight year. But Georgia Southern's pick, Appalachian State is picked number 4 by the coaches. I think that's a pretty good credit to what they did at the end of the year.
Oh, definitely. I think it says a lot because, I mean, we definitely struggled at the beginning of last year. So I think any higher than that, I think it may have been a little too generous, but I think 4th, it makes sense. And I mean, we played like hell at the end of last season. So I think that if we can go into the season playing like that, we'll show that we deserve a little more than 4th in the coming year. You know,
the fact of it is they get 20 starters back. The question being, and let me play devil's advocate here, you bring back 20 starters, but are they good 20 starters? You know, there's a difference between a real close-knit group and just 20 starters coming back. How do you feel at App State?
I mean, I think the 20 starters that they're bringing back are the unit that kind of came together at the end of last season when you look at it, and the team that got hot, because a lot of the beginning of the year was switching around, finding the right personnel to fit what they were trying to do. And when they got into their stride, I mean, they dominated down the stretch. And so if that's the same unit that they're bringing back, I honestly think that the 4th overall or 4th in the conference is a little bit disrespectful, but I think that they'll take it in stride, and this is something that they can use to build their season around, is having that hung on the wall, because they're going to play all those teams ahead of them at home at some point this year, and they're going to be the biggest games on their schedule. And so this needs to be a little bit of motivation for App State.
Travis, the one thing about it, you've got a great system under Coach Satterfield, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I guess that's what they're coming into the season with, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, the running game, really caught fire for the majority of last season. The year before that, stats-wise, we were able to run the ball, but a lot of that was, Marcus Cox making something out of nothing. Yeah. And, we were also playing teams in the Southern Conference. But, offensively particularly, I don't think there should be a whole lot, changes there. We're even more deep than we were last year. We have a few more quality wide receivers coming in, Mock Adams, Letman. They should be able to step in and help contribute. Also, at running back, because last year, Ferguson, Upshaw, and Cox was, 3 good backs, but that was about where it ended. This year we're probably coming in with 5 guys who we can turn around and hand the ball off to. So I think defensively is where you have a few more questions. They were able to figure it out at the end of last season, but that was once they really started bringing the pressure with quite a few more blitzes. So they should kind of keep that mentality going into this coming season, and hopefully they'll be able to carry that momentum.
I think one of the things that's really nice about this is the fact that App State has now paid their dues for the last 2 years. There was a lot of questions. Do you move to D1? Do you not? Do you stay there in the 1AA? I still like to call it that. And be the big guys in the whole country and win national championships as they have here. But I think now being bowl eligible, there's 7 bowls that are associated with the Sun Belt Conference now, including their big one, which is the New Orleans Bowl for the champion. But I think at the end of the rainbow, if these guys play the way they're supposed to play and finish 4th in their league, 3rd or 2nd, or maybe even win the championship, that's going to be something Appalachian State students and fans are going to say, this move wasn't bad. I think we kind of like this thing now.
Yeah, we've been starved to get a chance to be in it. I mean, last year, obviously, we didn't finish the way to. I mean, we would have potentially qualified, but probably not would have made it considering Georgia Southern's record in the conference. But this is a moment. I mean, for students like this, I don't know if we can really grasp how big this is yet. And I mean, it's going to be big for the program too, though, because you get a couple bowl wins or you at least get that national recognition, and all of a sudden you start bringing in solid recruits, and App goes from being a team that opens the season ranked in the 50s to potentially in the top 25 in a year, 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, well, for me, that recognition and that justification for moving up to FBS football did come last season, finishing third in the league. You know, I think that showed credibility, and knowing that we were young, you know, knowing you'd be able to build off those experiences leading into this season and hopefully win the league and make that bowl game.
Yeah, not even
pressure on them.
Yeah.
Any more pressure than what they had last year to try to do something at the end of the season?
I mean, there's definitely more pressure just from being bowl eligible. I think that people are expecting, or not expecting, but hoping to see them in a bowl, or I mean, just perform really well. But I think for the most part, the pressure is coming from how well we did at the end of last season, because to finish as strongly as we did with the start of the season, which was a train wreck, I think people are now saying, okay, well, you got it together at the end of last season. You're coming back with these guys. You need to start where you ended, or at least, you know, about the same place. I think if we come in and we start playing like we did at the beginning of last season, people are going to be shocked and disappointed. I mean, if they come in and say, you know, we had a good game, we didn't win the first couple of games, but even if they play well, I think people would be okay with it. But I mean, if they come in and they get pounded like Liberty or something like that, I think there's going to be some very upset people in the stands. And I think it's going to hit us how big all of this is when we, you know, those first couple of home games, when all of a sudden we're selling out the stadium, or I mean, getting it as packed as we have in the past. I think people are going to realize, you know, this is it. You know, we've gotten to where we can go. Now we got to do something with it. So,
having been a broadcaster both in the Southern Conference and, of course, when they had Marshall and Georgia Southern, Furman was very good at that time. App State, that was more normally your top four. And then moving into the Sun Belt Conference and seeing the growth of that conference, and, of course, the enthusiasm for their football programs as it grew every year. Their basketball was always fairly decent, but their football got better and better. And now to see App State and Georgia Southern in there, adding more strength to it, I think this is going to be a very fun year for everybody. And certainly you're riding in the Appalachian and you're following them on the field and elsewhere. It's going to be a lot of fun. And David will be back here next week, and we'll be talking about what the media always votes a little weird. For example, Idaho, New Mexico State are 9th and 10th by the coaches. They'll get some votes by the media. Come on, they're not a chance they're going to win. But the media will have it maybe a little different. Maybe App State will be a little higher. We don't know. By the way, one name off the basketball team that we didn't mention last week, signs in Germany. And let's talk about a signee off the Appalachian State basketball team.
Yeah, Tommy Spagnola. I mean, congratulations to him. He, you know, on an App State basketball team that struggled last year down the stretch. I mean, you know, they just couldn't find consistency throughout the season. They'd have some games that came out and you're like, wow, I mean, this team is really coming together. And the next team, they'd shoot 30% as a team and just drop an atrocious loss. And so, but he was the most consistent guy of that group. And I mean, he's exactly what you want in a player. He's not flashy, you know, off the court. He's a guy who was a mentor for younger guys on the team and a model. And I mean, he played ugly minutes, the down low boards, the offensive putbacks, things like that. The game that not a lot of people are willing to play and throw their body around, and he did a great job, and that's why he's getting a chance.
And it is a good story. You know, he started off at Radford. That things didn't work out there. He wasn't getting the playing time. Maybe some coach issues. Came back to App. It wasn't immediately said hey, you're even going to have a spot on this team. He walked on. He, from what I understand, I think he got noticed just playing at the SRC, and he ended up walking on. And then as a junior and a senior, he was a real contributor to this basketball team.
I think the one thing people here at Appalachian State, and for those that watch the Sun Belt Conference, is the fact that give Coach Fox some time. I watched him as an assistant at Davidson with Coach McKillop, and he's a tremendous coach.
Players rave about him.
Reacts to the players very well. The players react to him well, and you just have to give him time. And I think this Appalachian State athletic program realizes that, and I think it's going to be a good basketball year.
It's all about recruiting.
Yeah, and we know what the football is going to be. Now, let's get into the other part of football. Yes, the soccer, and it's the Gold Cup, and the United States. And did somebody on this panel say they were struggling scoring somewhere along the way, or Was our imagination that the Americans couldn't
Yeah,
score?
I think I remember that as well. It might be my
Hey,
left
6-0. They come up and defeat Cuba, and I mean we're dominant along with Dempsey, first hat trick in the history of this whole Gold Cup. I thought that was shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and first hat trick for Dempsey on
Yep.
the U.S. men's team. So, I mean, I know a lot of people were surprised. I know we were even talking about that we were shocked that it was his first hat trick.
Yep.
But just as being as promising as he is as a scorer. But overall, I mean, the U.S. just played a phenomenal game. I mean, they just were a unit,
Yep.
and they played like a true team. It wasn't, oh, let's get the ball to Dempsey, or let's get the ball here, or let's do this. It was let's work as a group and play against a team that could not handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, poor Cuba they tried. They worked really hard, but I know that the heat was a factor. It was about 100 degrees on an AstroTurf field, which, gosh, I don't even want to imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
And they were also playing down with several players. I know that they were missing a couple of guys. They had some people, I believe, out were suspended because of some red cards. They just were
Actually,
really struggling.
four players.
Was
were
it
out.
four?
Two that are normal rotation guys.
Yeah.
And then the other two were the backup type people. That's a lot of people to miss
Yeah.
in that. The one thing I thought was impressive with the Americans is the fact we scored early. 4 minutes and 15 minutes, we're up 2-0. It kind of takes a lot of the pressure, and it really puts more pressure on Cuba than it does the United States. I mean, I love playing from ahead. There's no doubt about that. So that I think played a big part in that. Now they play Jamaica on, and they came up with a win over Haiti, 1-0. And what kind of semifinal can we expect there?
Well, I mean, Jamaica will be a tougher test than Cuba was. Cuba's a team that was playing with 4 guys that defected from Cuba. Yeah, they only had, I think, 3 guys even available off the bench. Plus, Cuba was a lot of their players aren't even necessarily what you would say professional. They're semi-professional in Cuba and playing in the Cuban League. I couldn't even tell you what the name of that league is. But Jamaica will prove to be a tougher test. Many of the Jamaican players play here domestically in MLS, a few of which play overseas in Europe and some of the lesser divisions. So it'll always be a tough test. Jamaica always has a very athletic team, always has a very quick team that can really hit you on the counterattack. But I look for the U.S. to dominate most of possession, and if they keep whipping enough balls into the box, kind of like they did against Cuba with one of Dempsey's headers, and Zardes got on the end of one. Mm-hmm. So if they keep that style of play up and dominate possession like they should, I don't see us having any issues against Jamaica.
By the way, the semifinals will be Wednesday. They'll be playing at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta, so the temperature now suddenly becomes a very comfortable temperature for the fans and the players as well. The other half of that bracket will be Panama against Mexico, and both of those came down to penalty shots. Obviously, Mexico came down with, I think, and Travis and I were talking before, a very questionable penalty against Costa Rica in that Mexico, and of course a tremendous shot to win it, no doubt about that. But I thought the defender had just as much right going for the ball itself, and sure there was contact, and the guy was in the air, but so was the defender.
Yeah, I don't think you make that call in the
Not in
the 122nd minute.
Yeah.
Maybe in the 30th minute when the other team has the rest of the game to try to make that up. But first and foremost, I didn't think it was a foul to begin with, but certainly not in that situation. But the decision was the decision, and Mexico will move on to play Panama. This is a Mexico team that hasn't played in many ways very well. Certainly kind of underperformed to this point. I know there's a lot of pressure in the Mexican media. Miguel Herrera that he might be fired if they don't win this Gold Cup, which to me I feel like that's a little unfair. I think he's done a lot with what he has. This is a Mexico side that, right now, in general, they don't have the talent pool, in my opinion, to pull from that they maybe one time did, even like 5 years ago. But ultimately, I think the U.S. will make it through to the final through Jamaica, and we'll see. I think Mexico or Panama could make it through to this final. Panama was who the U.S. faced in 2013 for the Gold Cup final. And if the States win it this year, then we go to the Confederations Cup. If Panama or Mexico were to win it, then the U.S. would have a one-game playoff with whoever the winner of that this Gold Cup is.
You know, you're talking about the Mexico coach after they scored the penalty shot. They better check his blood pressure, because I mean to tell you, this man turned beet red with excitement and was jumping and screaming around. So it'll be interesting if he lasts out the rest of the season with that kind of thing. Are we seeing good quality soccer the way that we've seen it in the past? Anybody have any thoughts on, I don't know, is this a good brand of soccer right now we're seeing from these soccer teams?
I don't know that the high scoring is going to be consistent. I mean, we got a little spoiled with the Women's World Cup and now a 6-0 victory here, but that's just not what we can come to expect as fans for soccer, because that will phase itself out and it'll get back to 2-1 games and things like that. So I would urge every fan who's watching, like myself, who may not be the most devout soccer fan, to kind of temper your expectations as the tournament goes on, because we're seeing an anomaly.
Yeah. And you have to realize, you know, there's a very large style difference as far as play-wise between European sides and sides in CONCACAF. CONCACAF is much more physical. They want to hit you on the counterattack. They don't care as much about, you know, possessing the ball and just kind of dominating the game necessarily. You know, they want to hit you when you're asleep and sneak one by you, kind of thing. And that's what you have to do when you're Haiti, you know, when you're Cuba, when you're Jamaica, and you're playing a team, you know, like the United States, where for the most part you can be outclassed. But I would say that the 2013 Gold Cup was a much weaker tournament generally than this Gold Cup was. You have a team like Trinidad and Tobago who had a very poor showing in 2013, but who had a real chance to make the semifinal against Panama, you know, this year. So overall, I would say that this part of the world is moving forward, and hopefully, you know, we will have more respect as a CONCACAF region heading into the future.
By the way, those semifinals again at 7 and 9 will be on Wednesday, and again will be at the Georgia Dome, and you'll have a chance to catch us on TV, and we'll talk about them next week. Again, David Jackson back here in the host spot, also talking about Appalachian State football and the Media Day. That's where he is today in New Orleans. Speaking of Monday, they had to move the British Open back one day because of just normal winds over in Scotland. I mean, you know, they're nothing but 35 to 45 and 50 miles an hour. I thought it was so great. People trying to mark the ball in the every time you're trying to mark it, it's another 4 or 5 feet down the road. And one of the guys, Hoesthuizen, the young pro from South Africa, had one like this, and it moved. It went 6 feet the next day. Well, actually 2 days later, because they had to postpone one day. He knocks in this 6-footer for the birdie that would have been a natural. And now he, along with probably 15 or 16 other players, and having moved to Monday, we're kind of handcuffed here, telling you exactly more about winning. But I kind of liked seeing so many players with so many opportunities to win. Your thoughts on what you saw in the British Open so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely cool to have so many players have a shot at really winning this thing. I know that of the actual leaders, Dustin Johnson was the only person in the last round who was over par, and he, I think, ended, 3 or 4 over par. He bogeyed the last 3 holes. But, I mean, just saying that you have that many people who are all playing that well, I mean, it just makes for good golf. It makes for a more exciting thing as opposed to having one guy who's 7 under and, you know, is kind of dominating the whole thing. And I know that we all kind of enjoy watching Jordan. I'm sorry about that. Watching Jordan Spieth play. I know, at least for me, watching somebody younger do really well is kind of exciting, even though I can't play golf for the life of me. It's kind of fun to say, but he can.
By the way, he's not 21 maturity. I mean, this is a guy that he's far past 21 as far as maturity on the golf course. He's one of the storylines. I thought Paul Dunn, the young amateur out of UA Birmingham, by the way, an Irish player. And, of course, he stumbled in the final round a bit, but stayed in there late and tried to make a go of it. But I thought that was a story of Harrington coming up, playing so well, Oosterhuizen coming up and playing well at the end. It just went on and on as far as storylines.
Oh, yeah.
And ESPN, I still think CBS is the very best at golf, but ESPN did a good job, and ABC of covering. But I just thought there were a lot of storylines. And the golf course itself, unlike Chambers Bay, I guess we dished them enough. But unlike that, this was a true links course that really brought out the very best. I mean, you had to pitch the ball in, let it run, or you couldn't throw it to the pin. I just think it had a lot of ingredients that kind of brought we that watch golf and those that might be even a novice at watching golf. I thought it brought a lot of interest into the British Open this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, the course is definitely a tough one as well, but I think that having that extra day that they had out there, I know that Spieth came out and said something about it, as well as I believe Johnson said that they really appreciated actually having that one day off because their caddies were able to walk the course. They got some extra time in on the putting green. And I think it gave them a chance to really improve their game for this specific course. So I think that might be why we're seeing such good golf, is that the players just really got a chance to see what they were dealing with and to work in the atmosphere, as opposed to some of the other tournaments where they, kind of hop off the plane and start playing. So I think that the weather was kind of a strange factor in that it's hurting in some ways and it's helping in some ways, and I think it's just making...
It's Scotland.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought another interesting point was, so many guys had the 40 and 50-foot putts, and the announcers kept saying there's no way to practice that on the practice greens because there's nothing like that with those double greens. You can get the 50 and 60. So I thought it was rather interesting that a lot of elements came in as far as the preparation is concerned, as much as anything. Again, due to the postponing until the next day, we're not able to give you a definitive answer on the British Open, but next week we will touch on it all the way. Let's move on if we can, and the All-Star game. Mike Trout just seemed to be, he, by the way, has completed the cycle now with a home run leading off. He did a single, a double, and a triple, and then the home run in this game. That was in his 4 appearances in the All-Star game. But Mike Trout of the Angels is a very special baseball player, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike Trout is somebody who I think got overshadowed a little bit when he was coming out in the draft, because the talk had been about Bryce Harper for pretty much the entirety of Mike Trout's life, because Bryce Harper was supposed to be this phenom that was going to, 16 years old, he's crushing 500-foot home runs. And I just think that the thing about Mike Trout is that not only is he a great player on the field and he does amazing, just some of the plays that he makes out in the outfield and things like that are just unreal, but he's also a great ambassador for the league, which is a big deal because you had Derek Jeter, who was kind of the face of baseball, I'd venture to say, and with him leaving, they needed somebody to kind of come in and be that person for them, and I think he's taken on that role very well.
Now, are you saying that we need more good guys in baseball here? Because we got some bad guys, I know that.
Yeah, I think so. I think every league needs that face. I think for the NBA, you have like LeBron James or maybe Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, those guys. And for the MLB, they were kind of, the old guard is moving on, and so they needed to brand that. And it helps to take away from the fact when you have all these bad stories in each of the sports is when you have a big guy that you can point to and say, well, we still have role models. It's not all bad. And I think he's filled that role very nicely.
And it's American League wins, so they get the home field in the World Series. I still don't buy that. For some reason, I still don't buy that.
Well, I've expressed my views
many times
in this panel before, but touching on the kind of that next generation of baseball player for the majors, that's very important because without those young guys, you do lose steam. You see it in other leagues. They kind of have that that next coming of the guard, like you said. Guys like Mike Trout, Bryce Harper. Those guys can be the next real faces of baseball. And, baseball is a sport where, it's considered America's pastime, but many people, it's like, it takes forever to watch a game. Yeah. It has lost some steam. So those young guys are very important for the health.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it says a lot, too, just going back to Mike Trout, the fact that he is so respected and praised by his opponents. I know that the coach of the Red Sox came out after the game Saturday when he hit the walk-off home run with 2 outs left and basically said, he said it hurt, but, he's a good player. And, basically came out and said that he's a good guy and, if someone was going to do it, we're glad it was him, even though, they obviously were not happy about the situation. But I think it just says a lot about the player to have your opponents come out and say, you know what, you did a good job, as opposed to saying, well, they got one over on us and that kind of thing. It's good to have someone respect their skill, especially as young as he is. He's only 23. He's got a long time to continue at this pace of improving. So
before we move on, I want to get to some of these races going on. Certainly the Angels leading out in the West and the American just one up on the Astros right now. There's a lot of good races going on, but it's gotten down to almost a 2-team race, and I think all three of the National League and 2 of the 3 in the American. That East seems to be good. The Yankees, the Orioles, the Rays, and the Blue Jays all separated by 4.5 games. All the rest of them are like 1 or 2, but everybody else is like 7, 8, 9 games back. Are we seeing a good chance this is going to be a great run for some races in some of these divisions going on in American National League?
Oh, definitely. I thought that the Blue Jays were particularly interesting only because, like you said, they're only 4.5 games behind. They're in third place, but they're 4.5 games
Right.
behind the Yankees. They're only a game behind Orioles. Thank you. And so I think that overall they just have a really good chance. I know that they've got the best offense. They've scored over 100 or 480 runs. And I think that they have just had a phenomenal season. I think that they could overcome the next team. I don't know if they could beat the Yankees right now for number one, but I think that we're going to see some good baseball out of them, and I'm excited to kind of see where they end up going because they've been playing really strongly.
World Series teams last year, of course, Kansas City leading the Central Division of the American. They're +6 over Minnesota, so they're handling that pretty good. Elsewhere, San Francisco out in the West and the National, they're only a game back of the Dodgers. Are we seeing the Dodgers being able to unseat the Giants? Certainly they could still get the wild card, but are we seeing that to be the best race going on out in the West?
I wouldn't write the Giants off by any
Not a
means. You know,
chance.
the Giants have been so consistent these last 5 years. So, you know, that'll be a good race right up until the end. The NL Central, to me, is fascinating. I mean, you know, you have the Cardinals, Pittsburgh, and the Cubs.
Yeah,
The Cubs are like 8 games above 500.
Excuse me, could
David
you-
Jackson would be
Could
ecstatic.
you spell that for me, please?
Yeah, the Cubbies, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, so the NL Central is definitely a division to watch. I don't think the Cubs have it to overcome the class franchise that is the Cardinals. But it's very nice to see them relevant. And, you know, Pittsburgh has had some success in the last, few years.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how things play out down the stretch.
Sleeper team, watch the Nationals in the NL.
I was just about to bring them up, yeah, in the
watch
East.
them because they're so young and they're so talented. You know, we talk about Bryce Harper, but he's not even necessarily the gem on that team. I mean, they have Max Scherzer, they have Steven Strasburg as far as pitching goes. Those two guys alone, I mean, I know Strasburg has struggled this year, but we've seen in the past who that guy is. And he's been a little inconsistent, but I think injuries have played into that. And they're just a team that when they get hot, they're going to be very tough to beat.
Well, there you have it. We have talked about a lot of things, and don't forget, coming up next week, we have more on Appalachian State football. David Jackson will be in the chair again, Media Day down in New Orleans. They're talking all about the Sun Belt Conference, and you too will be talking about it when it gets up. That's our last call here on the Sports Bar, but before we go, let me put a little closing note on here to invite you to contact us with your comments on the show. Yes, we'll take good and bad, because if it's constructive, we will follow up on it. You can do that by going to www.watchapptv.com, and until next time, when we see you right here on the Sports Bar for all of our panelists, great job again today, gang. We'll see you again. So long, everybody. Have a good week.